Hey everybody, it's Tommy Canale and welcome back to Before the Lights podcast, the show that tells you how they made their mark. He has made over 500 appearances on national television as a stand-up comedian and over 60 times on The Tonight Show. An actor you may have seen in Trouble with the Curve, Spaceballs, and Lansky, plus many more. He's a motivational speaker, an MC, and a regular in all main showrooms in Las Vegas. He was a favorite guest of David Letterman and hosted the show in Dave's presence. A very close friend of Frank Sinatra, in which he was his opening act for 14 years and traveled 45 to 50 cities a year. A Harvey, Illinois native, please welcome to the show, Tom Dreesen. Tom, welcome to Before the Lights.
Thank you, Tommy. That's a very nice introduction. By the way, you said he hosted a show in David's presence. I actually hosted a show in David's absence.
David's absence. You are correct.
If I was hosting it while he was sitting there, there would have been a little bit of a conflict.
You are correct. Let's kick off here. You have made no bones and made no mistakes and not hidden that you've grown up in childhood poverty. You shine shoes in taverns. You set pins at bowling alleys. You were a caddy. You sold newspapers on the corners to support your siblings. Tell my listeners more about that time in your life and coming up in Harvey, Illinois.
Yeah, I when I give motivation talks, I bring that up, that I had 8 brothers and sisters. We lived in a shack. If a window broke, you stuck a rag in it. If you had holes in your shoes, you put cardboard in it. It was a rat-infested, roach-infested shack. There was no a bathtub and no shower and no hot water. We had to boil water. I mean, and this wasn't during the Depression. I'm not that old, but but yeah. I always say, and that's the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because from that, I learned, that if it is to be, it's up to me, that you get. I came from a neighborhood where the mantra was that you only deserve in life what you work for. And so as a little boy, my older brother and I and my sister, we did these kind of things, to make money to bring home to my family. Both my parents were alcoholic at one time, but my mom was a bartender and my dad was a very regular customer of most bars in the neighborhood. But it's just the way I grew up and never felt bad about that. And I still don't to this day. I think it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
Where did the decision come in your mind then to pursue to become an entertainer? How did that all transpire?
Absolutely, totally by accident. I never, ever thought of being a comedian. I never thought about being in show business. It was the furthest thing from my mind. I did enjoy, as a boy, when I was shining shoes in all the taverns, I did enjoy, I would go to my uncle's bar last, and he would tell jokes behind the bar. And I always thought that was kind of cool, that with his vocabulary, his vernacular, his hitting a certain word would cause this sound to come out of everybody's body and fill the room like electricity, and unite all these people. Mm-hmm. They all became as one in laughter. That always fascinated me. And I used to tell some of his jokes, many that should not be told on a Catholic school playground. but yeah, I thought, so I was even growing up, I always thought I could tell a good joke. When I was in the service, I was always the guy that if something happened, I could look at it and say, that would have been funnier if this happened, Mm-hmm. So I was good at those kind. When I was a bartender, when I came out of the service, a bartender in those same bars that I used to shine shoes in, the customers, sometimes I could create a story about someone in the neighborhood that everybody knew. So they knew their nuances and stuff like that. And I was good at those kind of things, tell a joke behind the bar and get a better tip, But I never thought I'd ever be in show business. And I was wandering aimlessly. I came out of the service. I had a wife and 3 kids. And I went from job to job. I worked for construction workers. I wheeled concrete and poured sidewalks in basements. I worked for carpenters. I was a laborer, bricklayers. I was a laborer, I wasn't a skilled guy by any stretch of the imagination, but just a laborer. And then I took a job in loading trucks. I became a teamster. And then got my card after about 6 months and became a foreman of the men, the teamsters that worked on the loading dock with me. So I became their foreman. These 48 guys that were teamsters guys who really loved me. And then I became their foreman. and all hell broke loose. 24, the guy said, "Hey, kid, that's really good. You know, you guys, hey, I wish you the best." And the other 24 said, "I wouldn't work for you. It was all an experience." And I was a private detective. I did part-time work with that. I did, I helped my brother in his photography business, but everywhere I went, I felt unfulfilled. I kept thinking there's something wrong. I don't belong here. I'd sit in the bar sometimes with my buddies at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'd say, I don't belong here, but I didn't know where I belonged. And Tommy, honestly, I began to pray. I really started to pray. I said, God, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? This can't be it. This can't be what my life is all about. And I joined a civic group called the JCs, in those days, the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And they had leadership training programs. They taught you how to, Robert's Rules of Order, how to conduct a meeting, how to form committees, subcommittees, but they attacked the problems of that community. And in doing so, you were trained how to be a leader. So one of the problems of the community in those days, as it is even to this day, were our drugs and youth. So I wrote a drug education program teaching grade school children the ills of drug abuse with humor, a concept I had to get the kids laughing and then plant the seeds of the ills of drug abuse. With helping me on this project was a friend of mine named John DeBoer. He agreed to work with me on it, a white kid. And so when I was proposing it one night to the JCs to run it as that they would sanction it as a JC project for me to allow me to go into the schools, I was proposing it. And at the end of that proposal, a young black man came up to me and said, I just joined the chapter. I graduated from Norfolk State College in Norfolk, Virginia, and E.I. DuPont recruited him into Chicago as a marketing rep. He said, I'd like to work with you on that program. I said, gee, I'm sorry, I already got a guy. Now, again, I was praying at that time. The next day, the guy I had, John DeBoer, calls me and says, I got a job out of nowhere, Tom. I just got a call. I can't do that with you. I said, gee, what was that black guy's name? Oh, yeah, Tim Reid. So I get a hold of Tim. We rehearsed the whole project, and we would go back and forth. And we walked into the classroom. And the moment I walked in that classroom with him, I realized what a blessing it was, because the children took to us right away because they were black and white. We had integrated schools. So Tim and I, we were young guys, and we started getting the kids laughing, playing off of one another, and we played music. And once we got their attention, we planted the seeds of the ills of drug abuse. The program became #1 in 50 states and in 22 foreign countries through JC publications on how to teach drug education at an elementary school level. In those days, they weren't teaching at college or a high school level. So the program became very successful. After about 8 times in those classrooms, going from different schools, one day a little 8th grade girl walking out of the classroom said, you guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team. And the thought of a black-white comedy team intrigued us because no one had ever done that before. So we became America's first black and white comedy team, the comedy team of Tim and Tom. In those days, there were no comedy clubs, none in America. So we worked what they call the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. The 20 Grand in Detroit, the High Chaparral in Chicago, the Burning Spear in Chicago, the Sugar Shack in Boston, the Club Harlem in Atlantic City before they had gambling. We toured all black clubs, and we did eventually white clubs, the Playboy Circuit, And the team stood up after 6 years, and Tim Reid went on to become Venus Flytrap on WKRP Cincinnati, and also on a show called Sister, and Simon and Simon. He's a very successful actor and director. And we wrote a book in 2005 called Tim and Tom, an American Comedy in Black and White. And we're still the best of friends. His children call me Uncle Tom, which is really funny.
Are you guys then the last duo to be biracial for
We're
comedy?
The first and the last, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I kind of thought. I didn't think there was anyone after you guys at all.
No, there were a couple of people that tried it after we started, and it didn't go anywhere. Steve Rossi and Marty Allen for a little while. No, Steve Rossi, I'm sorry, and Slappy White did it for a while. But it didn't. They were just basically doing Slappy's act, and Steve was singing. Tim and I, we did original monologues and stuff. But America wasn't ready for us. Hey, in those days, you didn't see a black guy and a white guy walking down the street together.
No.
Let alone on a stage together. Mm-hmm. The backdrop is the Vietnam War was raging. Students were protesting all over America. There were race riots in every major city in America, including Harvey, Illinois, my hometown, had one of the largest race riots in the country. And there was racial tension everywhere. And so Tim and I were going across the land trying to make people laugh. We did anywhere there was racial tension, we went. We did 11 prisons in 1 year. We did 3 times the county jail in Chicago, 3 times in 1 year. We did high schools and colleges. We didn't preach. We just went and tried to make people laugh. And I'll close with this, Tommy. One of the things I'll take to my grave, and so will Tim Reid. I cannot tell you how many times this happened where we went places that after our show, a young white kid would come up and say, I have a black friend that I'd like to reach out to. But if I do, the white guys are going to call me names and stuff. He said, but after watching you and Tim, I'm going to reach out to my black friend. Then a black kid would come up to and say, I got a white friend. I kind of like him. But if I do, the brothers are going to wear me out. But after watching you and Tim, I'm going to go, reach out to my white friend. We heard that more than you'll ever know all across the land. And I hold that near and dear to my heart more than anything that I've done in show business.
You've touched more lives than probably you guys even realize, because those stories from those people probably have gone in a pyramid effect downhill.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. After Tim and Tom, you moved to LA and you worked your way into the Comedy Store lineup, which is where basically you got discovered by the Tonight Show. Is it true that when you were working your way up through the Comedy Store and making waves there, that you were actually sleeping in an abandoned car as well?
Yeah, we know what happened when the team split up. I went out to the West Coast. My wife was thrilled at that time. What was her name again? Oh, yeah, Plaintiff. She hated show business, and I don't blame her. When she married me, her father worked in a factory for 40 years and never missed a day. He brought a check home every Friday, as did most people in Harvey. It was a blue-collar town in those days. So she married that guy, and she wanted that guy. Now, when I went into show business, she thought it was the dumbest thing, to be from Harvey, Illinois, and you want to be a comedian. Most people thought I was nuts, But the first time I went on stage and I got a laugh with something I had written, when Tim and I went on stage, it was like an epiphany. Like the dark clouds open up and the sun bursts through, like one of those B movies that my whole being went, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. And now I know, God, now I know what I want to do. I want to be a comedian. The thought that you might make a living as a stand-up comedian overwhelmed me, that you could survive just making people laugh. So when the team split up, my wife thought, okay, now you're going to get a job and come home and get a job in the factory. So I said, I had one more thing to do. I went out to the West Coast, but I was thinking I'll get on at the Comedy Store. And, because everybody in 1975, wherever you went in America, people say, what do you do for a living? You say, I'm a stand-up comedian. The next question out of their mouth was, oh, yeah? Have you ever been on Johnny Carson? If you hadn't been on Johnny Carson in the eyes of America, you just weren't a comedian. You might want to be one. You might going to be one, but you weren't one now. So everybody, when Johnny Carson left New York in 1972 and went out to the West Coast in Burbank, the comedians began to migrate out here because one appearance on the Tonight Show changed your life. Mm-hmm. Freddie Prinze did one appearance. The next day had a sitcom. I did one appearance, and the next day CBS signed me to a development deal. 26 million people watched that show. It was an amazing, place to first of all, the pressure to get on at the Comedy Store was almost greater than the pressure to get on the Tonight Show. Because if Mitzi didn't like you, it's back to Harvey, Illinois, pal. Right. First of all, there was the only comedy club at that time. There was no improvisation or Laugh Factory or anything out here in Hollywood, just the Comedy Store. And we comics were coming from all over the world to get on at the Comedy Store. So the pressure was enormous. The night I auditioned for her, took me a month. What I ended up coming out here, as you pointed out, the car. I had a friend that I had gotten her some gigs, and she wanted me to house sit her house because she was going on the road. Now, where I'm from, when you're sitting on a house, you're going to burglarize it. I never heard the word house sitting. I never knew what that meant, sitting on a house. So I stayed there for about 3 weeks, hitchhiking every night to the Comedy Store. But when she came back, she said, you can't stay here. My boyfriend's a very jealous guy, and you can't stay here. I ended up, there was an old car in the back, a Nash Rambler that was up on blocks. And when I used to dump her garbage, I saw this old car. I ended up moving my stuff. There was an old Nash Rambler where the front seat came down. And I slept in that car for almost a month, hitchhiking up and down Sunset Boulevard, washing up in the gas station, living on $1 a day. I would go to Kentucky Colonel and get corn and cluck for under $1. To this day, when I go by Kentucky Colonel's, I genuflect,
That is unbelievable. You said people thought you were a little crazy, but in 1989, you released an album called That White Boy's Crazy, which was recorded in front of an all-black audience in Harvey, Illinois. Speak to me about recording this back home in front of an all-black audience.
Well, I grew up in a predominantly black area. I played basketball on an all-black basketball team, and I did a lot of routines about that on the Tonight Show. I played football with all black kids. I just grew up in that environment, as a little boy, ball hocking with the black kids, when golf balls would go over a fence by a golf course, the other black kids would run the black kids and I would run and try to get the ball and sell it back to the golfer. So I grew up in that environment. And so when I first went on the Tonight Show, I had worked all black clubs with Tim and I did some on my own. So when I went on the Tonight Show and was doing routines about playing basketball on an all black basketball team, everywhere I went, white people would say, do black people laugh at your material? Do black people laugh at your material? I kept hearing that. So one day I went and did an album in front of an all black audience. And whenever people would say, do black people laugh at your material, I'd whip out a CD and say, well, give me $11.99 and you can find out for yourself. It was a lot of fun doing that in my hometown because they would be critical too. These are people I grew up with.
Right.
And whenever you work at an all black audience, those who have done it know that, black audiences in those days, they react to what you're saying, almost like the amen corner in church. They react to what you're saying. You see, I just got in from St. Louis. My brother lives in St. Louis, and the woman, well, my sister lives in St. Louis. Well, maybe she knows my brother, and you had to learn to work in between those kind of things, So I had such a great time going back home and doing it in front of people that I grew up with, It was fun. It was really fun.
You've performed with the likes of Sammy Davis Jr., Liza Minnelli, Natalie Cole, Smokey Robinson, and many others. But tell me and my listeners how you met Mickey Rudin, who was Frank Sinatra's lawyer, which ends up connecting you to Frank.
After I did my first appearance on The Tonight Show, a whole new world opened up for me. I was doing Dinosaur, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train. I'm the only white comedian to ever do Soul Train. I was doing all these shows, Hollywood Squares, and there was a show called Sammy and Company that Sammy was hosting, and I got on that show, and Sammy, I did a lot of routines about growing up in a black neighborhood. Sammy took me on the road with him. And so now I start touring with singers. Sammy had me for like 3 years. But singers in those days, you had to work clean to get on The Tonight Show. There was no cable television. So I was writing new material constantly that go on The Tonight Show that could make grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids laugh, right? So singers in those days wanted an opening act that wouldn't offend their audience. So consequently, Natalie Cole, Gladys Knight, Liza Minnelli, Smokey Robinson, who we're still buddies to this day. I toured with them, Frankie Avalon and James Darren and Tony Orlando and Don. They all wanted a singer that wouldn't offend their audience. And then I'm working with Smokey Robinson at Caesars in Lake Tahoe, and Frank Sinatra was appearing next door at Harrah's. And I was a big Sinatra fan my whole life. When I was shining shoes in the bars, he was on the jukebox. That's how I was 10 years old, shining shoes in those bars. So I want to go catch one of his shows. So I'm there 1 week with Smokey, and I could have went on any night. Why I went that one night, I don't know. It's just something said, I'll go tonight. And I didn't even change out of my stage clothes. I left Caesars, and if you know Tahoe, you run one casino over, and that's Harrah's. Mm-hmm. I was running into the showroom, and I knew everybody there because I had performed there. And as I was running into the showroom, the vice president of Harrah's Hotel was talking to a big heavyset guy with a cigar. And he saw me, and he said, Tommy, come here. I walked over, and he said, Tommy, this is Mickey Rudin. Well, I recognized the name. That was Frank Sinatra's lawyer. A very powerful guy in Hollywood. And Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen, and I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra. And the lawyer got a pained expression on his face like he heard that a million times. And he winked at the vice president, and I caught the wink. He said, hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? I said, Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? He started laughing. And he said, hey, I like this kid. So a week later, I got a call. They wanted me to do 1 week with Frank Sinatra at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City. And I thought, great, I'll try to get my picture taken with him, hang it in every bar back in Harvey, Illinois, and Chicago. And the second night I worked with Frank, he took me out to dinner, he and his wife, Barbara. And we're in the middle of dinner. I can remember like it was yesterday. He set his knife and his fork down. And he looked at me. He said, I like your material and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested. And I didn't say, let me check my calendar.
Right.
I said, yeah. And it turned into 14 years, 45, 50 cities a year. And just the greatest, a little boy shining shoes in bars in Harvey, Illinois, hearing Frank Sinatra. Ended up touring with him for 14 years in 45, 50 cities. And one day carried his coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California.
I know people have always asked you to tell Sinatra stories, but instead of me asking, I did some research and thought I'd tee a couple up and have you just tell these stories. One of them is singing Strangers in the Night with Frank Sinatra or riding in his car in the middle of the night because Frank stayed up all night long.
Well, when I stayed at his compound down in Rancho Mirage, I'd stay down there like 6 times a year and just hang out. Sometimes we do shows down there, but I'd hang out. And then he never went to bed till the sun came up, whether we were on the road or off the road. Frank was nocturnal. He loved, staying up till dawn. And then he would catnap all during the day. And he wanted you to hang with him, which was fun for about 10 years, but it got kind of wore me out because I like to play golf, But so when I'd stay down in the compound, he'd come and get me sometimes in my bungalow. He had this incredible compound in Rancho Mirage on Frank Sinatra Drive. And the compound had the main house where he lived, of course, stayed, but it also had swimming pools and tennis courts and all sorts of other things. But it had bungalows on the outer perimeters named after his songs, New York, New York, Strangers in the Night, Tender Trap. One night, he comes and gets me and says, take a ride, Tommy. We were riding around till dawn. When I was in the car alone with him, I'm going to digress for a minute. He wasn't he wasn't Frank Sinatra, the big star. And I wasn't Tom Dreesen, the comedian. I was a kid from Harvey, Illinois, and he was a kid from Hoboken. And we would talk about that, about how he grew up, how I grew up around saloons, because his mom and dad owned a saloon. And I, of course, my mother was a bartender, and my dad lived in saloons, So we'd have a lot of talks about that. But one particular night, he told me something very personal. And I was driving, and after he told it to me, he said, I shouldn't have told you that. And I said, well, it won't go any further than this car. He said, I know, but I shouldn't have told you that. And I said, well, like I said, it's not going to go any further than this car. And it's not like we're strangers, we're friends, And I don't know what made me do it, but I looked at him, I said, strangers in the night, exchanging glances. He said, for God's sake, if you're going to sing this song, get in tune. He started singing Strangers in the Night. And I said, exchanging glances. He'd say, wandering in the night. What were the chant? We were doing this back and forth. Now we pull into the compound and he said, good night, Tommy. He always smacked me on it. Good night, Tommy. And he said, he smacked me on the cheek, good night. And I was going to my bungalow and I was thinking, if I went back to my own neighborhood and told all the guys in the neighborhood who I used to attend bar, they'd all be in the bar listening to his music. If I had said, I was just riding around with Frank Sinatra and we were singing Strangers in the Night, they'd say, get the hell out of here with that BS. But it happened. And it's a moment I'll never forget.
Did he and Harry Carey go out one night and did he drink Harry Carey out?
Harry Carey was a friend of mine because, I sing the seventh inning every year at Wrigley Field. I'm not a singer, but neither was Harry Carey, But so at Wrigley Field in the seventh inning, they let celebrities sing. And so every year I've done it for 20 years, ever since Harry passed away. I throw out the first pitch and sing it. And I was in Chicago with Frank one time, and I was up in the booth with Harry being interviewed. And Frank was at the Ambassador East, and he saw the interview. And then he said to me later that night, he said, I got to teach Harry how to sing. He said, he butchers that song, And we start talking about Harry likes to drink and all that stuff. And so I set up that Harry and Frank at the pump room, that they would meet there after our show one night. And after a day game the Cubs had, but Harry hit all the bars all night long, So anyhow, long story short, they sat there and they were going to see who's going to drink each other under the table. And at 4:30 in the morning, Harry threw his hands up. He said, you got me, Frank. I'm going to bed. You got me.
The last one I want to bring up, which I think really tells a story about who Frank is and who Frank was. The Mark Auditorium, where after about 3 songs, he starts to forget the lyrics. You guys think that this might be the end of Frank, but it really wasn't.
Well, it was toward the end of his career. And of course, he was forgetting lyrics every now and then. He was even using a teleprompter. But he was, he would capture it, and he'd lose a lyric or two, and then he'd come back to it. But so we were all thinking, when is he going to lay it down? At some point, when is he going to lay it down? And we're at the Mark Auditorium in the Quad Cities, which, as you know, is what is it, Moline, Illinois? No, Moline, Illinois. Yeah, and Betancourt, Iowa, and Davenport, Iowa, and I forgot what the other town. The 4 Quad Cities. And anyhow, so it was a huge, I think, 15,000 seater, and the people. I went out and did a show, and they were just a great audience. And he went out and he was kicking them, killing them. He did 3 songs, and they were loving him. And he said to do the 4th song, and he blanked on the lyrics. For some reason, in the middle of the song, he couldn't think of the next lyric. He blanked on it, and the orchestra was in the pit, and they kept playing. And he started saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And I saw this, and I went, "Oh God." I started working my way to stage left. We were in the round, but I started working my way there. And now he's whispering, "I'm sorry." And the orchestra, realizing that he wasn't singing, start winding their instruments down to one at a time to this eerie silence in this huge arena. And now he's whispering into the microphone, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So sorry." I think this is it. I'm stage left now. I'm going to get him and say, "Let's go home, Mr. S. Let's go home. It's been a great career, but it's time to go home. Let's go home." And just when I thought he was going to do that, it looked like he was going to turn around and walk away. A guy way up in the top of the arena stood up and started shouting as loud as he could, put his hands by his mouth. He said, "That's all right, Frank. That's all right, because we love you, Frank. It's okay, because we love you, Frank." And he started to applaud. And the guy next to him started to applaud. Pretty soon people around him started to applaud, to now 100 people, now 500, now 1,000, now 2,000. Now, all of a sudden, it's circulating around, and now like 15,000 people are just cheering and applauding this guy. And I think this is a great way to go out. This is it. I'm all choked up. He stood there for the longest time, and he went back to the microphone, and they quieted down. And all of a sudden, when they quieted down, he went into the next number. "Come rain or come shine," it was. "I'm going to love you like nobody's loved you, come rain or come shine." And when he finished that song, they just would not stop cheering, standing up and cheering. And just before his next number, he pointed up to the crowd and he said, "I love you too, pal." And he sang for about a year afterward.
Wow. What life lessons? I know there's a bunch, but is there one life lesson that sticks out that you learned from Frank?
There's so many, Tommy. I could write 2 chapters on some of the things he taught me. But one of the things that I'll never forget, and he was the most benevolent human being. There were 2 things that I want to tell you about. But one is, by the way, can you hear this leaf blower guy? Is it coming through?
No, I don't hear him.
What they do is they have 5 or 6 illegals come in my neighborhood every day, and they strap a Volkswagen engine on their back, and they blow one leaf across the street, and the other guy blows the other leaf back.
I got one of them in my complex. I think their off button doesn't work. It just stays on all day long.
And they always do. I think there's a light out there that says, "Hey, Dreesen's on a podcast," or "Dreesen's doing an interview," and that's when they bring all the leaf blowers. But 2 things that so many things. But one thing I'll never forget. He said to me, we were leaving the Waldorf Astoria. We were on our way to do a gig, and we were walking out the back entrance. He couldn't go out the front; he'd get mobbed. So security was taking us to the limousine, and a woman jumped out of the doorway, and she started screaming, "Mr. Sinatra, please, Mr. Sinatra, please, please, Mr. Sinatra." And they put Frank in the limo, and finally they were holding her back, and she was hollering, "Mr. Sinatra, please." And he finally got out of the limo, and he went up to her. He said, "What is it, ma'am? What is it?" She said, "My husband is home, very, very ill, very ill. And if you would sign an autograph, it would just mean the world to him because he's such a fan of yours." And Frank said, "Sure." And he's signing the autograph. And she said, "Oh, what beautiful cufflinks." They were very, very expensive, $1,000 cufflinks. I know where he got them at. He said, "Thank you." And when he finished the autograph, he took the cufflinks off and he handed them to her. He said, "Give these to your husband." She said, No, I don't want them. I was just admiring them." He said, "No, I want your husband to have them." We get in the limo, and I said, "Frank, that was beautiful. But why did you do that?" He said, "Tommy, if you possess something that you can't give away, then you don't possess it. It possesses you." Mm. And I never forgot that. He said later, he said, Tommy, it's okay if somebody says they like your car and you don't give it to them. But when you're alone in the bathroom shaving, you have to admit to that guy in the mirror, that car owns you because you can't give it away. He said, Aristotle Onassis, who had billions of dollars, he had his own yachts, private jets. You know, he had mansions, billions of dollars. The second he died, it transferred. Nothing we have is ours, Tommy. We're only using it. That shirt on your back, if you die tomorrow, somebody else is going to own that shirt, so it's not even your shirt. And that really changed my life about a lot of things. And then another thing that doesn't have any humor to it, but he told me one time that when his career, he said, Tom, there was a time I was the hottest thing in the country. He said, I could call anybody in this country and they'd take my call. I could call the president of the United States and he would take my call. He said, and then I got cold. I got cold for several years. And it was just before From Here to Eternity, the movie, right? He said, and I couldn't get anyone to answer my call. I couldn't get recording companies, agents. They wouldn't take my call. He said, I got cold. And he said, and then I got hot again. And now I'm hot again. He said, I'm at a private party. I look across the room and there's that guy who wouldn't take my call. And I would look at him and he would look at me and he'd put his head down. He said, but what he didn't understand is that now I understood. We're in show business. That's 2 words. I couldn't do business for him. That's why he didn't take my call. He said, it was my fault. I thought we were friends.
Wow.
And I tell young entertainers all the time, it's show business. Frank said, it wasn't his fault. It was mine. I thought we were friends. Wow. How profound that was.
Those are both profound. I love both of those. Moving forward, what's it mean to you that you've received a Golden Palm Star on the Palm Springs, California Walk of Stars?
Yeah, well, you know, those things, you know, I you know, after a while, awards, that's nice. I mean, it's nice, you know, but after a while, awards, you know, when I went through my divorce, I had to clean out the garage and I had a big box full of awards and I threw them out. Now I got another whole room full. I mean, you know, they give you these things. Hey, can you come and do 10 minutes for our charity? And then you get the Man of the Year award. You go, wow, I'm the Man of the Year. It's so much. It's really, you know, I don't put a lot of stock in that. A couple of things that I do treasure. One, I received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor Award because that's where my ancestors came. That's where the Italian side of my family and the Irish side of my family came through Ellis Island. And I ran, every year I'd run 26 miles for multiple sclerosis. My sister had MS, so we called it 26 miles for Darlene. Mm-hmm. And I raised a lot of money for MS and continued to do a lot of charity work. So I received this award for doing humanitarian service to my country. So that kind of meant a lot to me only because that's where my ancestors came. And it was kind of touching for me to be there where they came through, you know. And then I mentioned their names, you know. So those kind of things, you know. You know, again, you know, especially when they like comedy, there's no funniest person in the world. There is no such thing as that. The funniest person in the world is the one who makes you laugh. It might be your Aunt Edna, mm-hmm. you know, it might be your Uncle Clyde, you know, who makes you laugh. So those kind of things you'd take with a grain of salt, you know.
You've been part of over 100 charities. You mentioned a couple of them there. Are you still part in doing the Tom Dreesen Celebrity Classic too?
No, I don't do I do a golf tournament in Chicago sometimes. So my new charity is called the Illinois Fatherhood Initiative, because that is if America is to be destroyed, it won't be destroyed from without because of our powerful military forces, you know, but what's going to kill America is that we're decaying from within, the family structure. That's what's going to cause America to fold. That when I was growing up in Harvey, Illinois, 4% of the children in 1960, 4% of the children were being born without a father in the home. Today, 75% with no father in the home. 3 out of every white children born in America have no father in the home. 3 out of every 10 have no father in the home. Almost 5 out of every Hispanic have no father in the home, and 7 out of every 10 African-American families have no father in the home. It's the breakdown of America. When I was growing up, we were more afraid of our fathers than we were of the police. Every neighborhood, the Irish neighborhood, the Polish neighborhood, the African-American neighborhood, all those neighborhoods, the fathers policed that neighborhood. if there was a boy, spray painting or stealing or snatching a woman's purse, the minute that community grabbed him and took him home to his father. So well-intentioned but misinformed during the 60s, the war on poverty, where they start saying, well, if you have one baby out of wedlock, we'll give you $250. If you have two babies out of wedlock from two different men, you get $500. If you get three babies out of wedlock, $750 a month from three different men. When I grew up in every neighborhood, the mantra was, you get a girl pregnant, you stand by her. My mother, when I was 13 years old, said, if you get a girl pregnant, you'll take care of her. I'm 13 years old. She's telling me this, but it was, if the boy said, well, I don't want to marry you, but you're going to support that child, because if you don't, we have to. And then along came this war on poverty, and they said, we will become the financial responsibility. We will take the father's place. The government will take the father's place. And to me, that was the beginning of the end of the family structure in America, and it is to this day. It is. They talk about the gangs in Chicago and all the shootings, and gee, what are we going to do? And how did this all begin? Like it's rocket science. It's not rocket science. It's because you have a grandmother with 4 children. The mother is not there. The grandmother's trying to take care of the children, and she's got a broomstick, and the gangs have an AK-47. Who's going to win that fight? So that's my charity. That was a long story. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. I really appreciate that, because I think that needs to get out there. That's a story that's not told enough, that needs to get more air to.
Well, it is. I mean, it's so, why it's going to continue? Because politicians won't stand up and say, America, we made a mistake. We made a terrible mistake. We meant well, but we made a mistake. We got to stop now and start all over again. We need fathers in the home. We need the president of the United States Senate. We need senators, mayors. We need church leaders. Stop with this nonsense of you're going to impregnate 4 or 5 young girls and you're not going to take responsibility for raising that child. That's what the Illinois Fatherhood Initiative is all about. We honor fathers, and we talk about fathers in the home. Anyhow.
I love that. June 2020, you released your book, Still Standing, My Journey from the Streets and Saloons to the Stage in Sinatra, has over 400 5-star reviews on Amazon. You have to be proud of this book.
I really am. Tommy, I really am, because I at first, ever since I was in show business, if something funny would happen or something poignant, I would come home and I'd journal. I'd write it down. And I began to collect these stories and things that moved me, things that I saw that moved me, and the people I toured with. And I kept putting them into some sort of book structure. And then I got a contact by a couple of guys, said, hey, we want to help you with that. And long story short, we wrote the book. And Still Standing is a double entendre. I'm 50. This is my 52nd year as a stand-up comedian. So I'm still standing. I'm still doing stand-up. But I also was knocked down a lot in my life. And I kept getting back up again. And that's why, so it's a double entendre. I'm still standing. I was knocked down physically in my life too, but I keep getting back up again. And that's what I wanted. I wanted people to read it and say, hey, if he did it, I can do it, with his mediocre talent, if he could do it, I could do it.
Listeners, go to the show notes. I'm going to put a link to Tom's website, and also where you can get your hands and purchase the book, and make sure you do so and give this a read. Talk about the one-man show, The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh. It's an evening of laughs and stories about yourself and Old Blue Eyes.
Everywhere I went after Frank died, and I'm going to digress. One time on his private jet, we were flying into Palm Springs. And the jet then would come back here to Van Nuys, where I live in Sherman Oaks. So, but sometimes I would stay down there with Frank. But we were getting ready to land, and Frank said, are you going to stay with me for the weekend, Tom? I said, no, it was a Thursday. I said, I got to go back tomorrow and do the Tonight Show. And he said, well, I'll call Fred DeCorda, I'll get you out of it. I said, no, I don't want to get out of it. I said, it's like my 50th appearance at that time, and they're making a deal out of it. So he said, wow, that's a lot of times on the Tonight Show. Is that a record? I said, well, there's other comedians. There might be 3 or 4 did more than me, but it doesn't matter, Frank. I said, no matter what I do in my life, I could find a cure to cancer. My obituary is going to say the comedian who toured with Frank Sinatra. He said, well, maybe my obituary will say the singer who toured with Tom Dreesen. And we both started laughing so hard, like 2 high school sophomores. I mean, it was so funny. He's going, what? And I mean, it was such a funny moment, the way he said it. It's come to pass that's what's happened in my life. No matter where I went after Frank passed away, tell me about Frank Sinatra. I was running a marathon. CNN guy was out there. We're getting ready to take off. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm out here with Tom Dreesen, about to run his first marathon. Tom, tell me something about Frank Sinatra. You got any good Frank Sinatra stories?" So it come to pass that everywhere I went, people asked it. So I put together a one-man show, a 90-minute show called "The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh," and it's stand-up comedy. I come out and I do stand-up comedy for like a half an hour, but then I segue over to a bar, and I tell a funny story at the bar, and all the lights go out in the theater, and Frank comes on the screen and he's singing, "It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me," like he's pointing at me, I'm behind the bar. And set him up, Joe. Anyhow, when he gets to the chorus, "Make it one for my baby and one more for the road," he goes off screen and a spotlight hits me, and now I'm in a bar and the audience is in a bar with me, and I've come home. And I tell them the first time I heard that voice, I was shining shoes in a bar in Harvey, Illinois, and he was on the jukebox. And I take him from that little boy in Harvey, Illinois, hearing him on the jukebox, to one day carrying his coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California. And I take them on a journey with a lot of laughs. I mean, I go through my military years. I go through my childhood. I go through the Tim and Tom years, working all black clubs. I go through touring with Sammy. But the culmination is when I get to Frank and all the years I went, and the fun things that happen. I have video, and I have every time I'm telling a story, pictures come on the screen authenticating the story. And it's a funny, I make them laugh, but then I take them to the funeral, and sometimes I have them in tears, but then I close with a very funny monologue. And then I toast them with the Jack. On the bar, we have a bottle of Jack Daniels, which was Frank's drink of choice. So I close them, I toast at the end. I said, "Now I wish for all of you what Frank Sinatra wished for you. The very last song that he ever sang on stage is that the best is yet to come. Good night, everybody." And then you hear Frank singing, "The best is yet to come," as they're leaving the theater,
Now I want to see this show big time. I really want to see this show.
I did it in Las Vegas at the theater there. I did it twice. Why am I blanking? What's the name of the theater there that the locals all go to in Las Vegas? There's a big theater there.
The Smith Center?
I'll think of it later. But at one time a guy wanted to offer me coming in there and doing that show, staying there and doing that show every night in Las Vegas, right? But that would have meant I'd have to like go there and live there, for a while. And now I'm, I got kids and I got grandkids, and I want to be around them a lot more. But I do go out on the road, and I do it in theaters.
I'm going to keep an eye out sometime, because I'm sometimes down in your area as well, in the Southern California. So maybe somewhere in the travels, I'll find out you're doing a show and come check it out.
Where are you at right now?
I'm in Las Vegas.
Oh, that's right. I thought you were in Vegas. Yeah. From that Sands Hotel thing behind you. By the way, it was one of my favorite rooms to work. I was under contract at like 9 different hotels in my career.
For the Copa room?
I love the Sands, the Desert Inn, the Riviera, the Golden Nugget. Why? Because they had low ceilings. A comedian loves low ceilings. Says laughter is sound. It hits a ceiling and comes at you. The more intimate the room, the more we score. The toughest rooms, the Caesar's Palace, one of the hardest rooms to work because it's a high ceiling. And when I first started out, they served food, when you were going out on stage, and waiters and waitresses taking, bussing tables, and oh God, you really had to dig in over there.
Tom, man, thanks so much for coming on. This has been a delight and honor to have you on my show and telling your story, but also some stories about Frank.
Well, he made that town, Frank Sinatra. I will close with this, if you don't mind, but that they don't build a monument to him on the Strip. He made multimillionaires out of all those hotel owners, because the drop in the pit, when Frank was there, the mantra always then was, what was the drop last night? Meaning, how much did people gamble?
Right.
Okay. In those days, you want to see the show, you see the show. You want to get free food, but what's the drop? Wherever Frank went, the drop was 10, 15, 20 times more enormous. And all due respect to Tom Jones, Engelbert Humperdinck, all the other Liza, all those wonderful singers. When Frank was there, the high rollers came. One night in Atlantic City, one man lost $750,000 one night, and the next night, $870,000. One Sinatra fan lost $1.5 million. One. At the Golden Nugget, it's in the Guinness Book of Records, Danny Schwartz, a friend of Frank's, a big Frank Sinatra fan and a friend, lost $5 million in one night. One Sinatra fan. So when he was in town, the hotels were sold out. High rollers came from China. high rollers came from Japan. You know, he sold out in Japan when he was, you know, I think it was 1992 or something. He sold out in Japan. He you know, this guy had the big gamblers of every ethnicity came to watch Frank and want to be in that casino, you know. So the drop was enormous, you know.
I had a chance to see him when I was in high school. He was later on in life at the Caesar's Palace, and I passed on the opportunity. And to this day, I still regret that I didn't get a chance to go see him. I had it, and I turned it down for whatever reason.
Well, you know what? You're too young a guy. You know, it's interesting. I went to a shoe store one day. I mean, a clothing store one day, and the guy came up to wait on me. He said, "You tour with Frank Sinatra?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I got to tell you something." He said, "I turned 42, and one day I turned on this radio, and this guy Frank Sinatra singing, and I said, 'Where has this guy been all my life?'" He was always there, but you grew into him. You know, when you're a kid, it's rock and roll and all the other stuff. You know.
That is correct, man. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Tom. I appreciate this.
You're welcome, Tommy. Let's do it again.
Yes, we definitely will. Listeners, make sure you go to the show notes to get looked up at the links to Tom's site, his book, and also to get the extra 5 interviews. They're yours to have, available starting at just $2.99. I've broken them out into categories for you. Go to beforethelightspod.com/shop or just click the link in the show notes. That's going to do it for this episode of Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale. And until next time, everybody, a salute, a chin chin.